Recently, I did a video about selling some gear in order to double down on the things I really like. So today, let's talk about what I'm doubling down on. If a bunch of my gear got Thanos snapped, here's what I hope would survive. Or put more simply, if I absolutely had to sell most of my gear, here's what I would keep. And I reserve the right to change my mind on this, and in fact, you may have noticed this is a redo of a video idea I did last year, but things have changed since then, mainly my goals. So one of my main goals with music production for a very long time has just been to use whatever I have at my disposal to make high energy, high quality, cleanly produced music that reflects vibes I like. That's never going to change. But to add to that now, over the past year, I've had the opportunity to play it live quite a bit, and that's been exhilarating and a really cool framework to work within for production, because I've really been enjoying thinking about how to craft a live set from the ground up. And that's been my obsession over the past year's worth of time. So those dual goals are going to be very reflected in my updated list: high quality production and live performance. And I should also mention that this is very gear centric, and your list is going to be very different from mine, almost certainly, but I think it can be helpful to examine the stuff that we find ourselves using a lot and why, and use it to tailor our workflow to what we really like. And I should mention, none of this stuff is essential. Hardware is a luxury. It's fun to have. I am a little uncomfortable with my status as a gear tuber because I think it places an overemphasis on gear over creativity. So take all this with a giant grain of salt, but hopefully it's useful. So let's get into the list. First up on the list are my beloved Novation Circuit Tracks and Novation Circuit Rhythm. These went from becoming production devices I really enjoyed that I would do some kind of jams for YouTube with, to being the core of my live setup. And they really work with the way my brain works. And that's why, despite their limitations, despite some frustrations, I keep coming back to them. The design of the user interface is something I personally find incredibly intuitive and tactile, and that was always a draw of the circuits for me ever since I was using the Circuit OG years ago now. And they are super flexible for live performance. The ability to have just everything swap out at once but keep the flow of music going, the ability to mute and unmute and switch scenes and entire projects and tweak parameters kind of all at once, means that performing live with the circuits is incredibly flexible, and that's something I really value in the setup. I can build some guardrails into my live jamming in order to make me unlikely to make a catastrophic error on stage, but I can also give myself a lot of freedom to structure a song and kind of remix my own music in real time as I see fit, and even kind of set a set list, because my live set at this point can be up to like an hour and 15 minutes long, and I don't have a time slot to play that's as long as that. So I can kind of pick and choose what to play depending on the type of event, depending on when I'm playing, and depending on the audience. A year ago, there would have been at least one circuit on the list, but now it's both, because using the two together, I now find indispensable for performing the kind of electronic music that I want to perform the way I want to perform it. Moving from live performance to production, let's talk a bit about the MPC-1. This has become my go-to production station, where it's got at my fingertips most of the stuff that I would want to do during a normal music production session. And it is hands-on enough that I find it pretty fun to use. For quite a while, I've been impressed with how much the MPC-1 can do for being a standalone device, and how many different layers of sound manipulation you get. And that's one of the main reasons I keep coming back to it. Plus, I've just been using it for so long that it's become quite intuitive to me now, where it's more compact than my Akai Force, so I've developed a lot more muscle memory on it, and I'm much more likely to actually pick it up and take it somewhere other than my desk. So I've taken it to a friend's house to do like co-production, and I can take it around the house if I want to. Despite the fact that products put out by InMusic can be unreliable at times, the MPC One has become a reliable mainstay for me, to the point that when I use it, I don't really think about the fact that I'm using a standalone hardware device and don't feel like I'm going out of my way to use it. It's just kind of there, and it's just away from my brain to my headphones. And maybe this sounds crazy, but I would rather deal with the friction of, say, exporting tracks from my MPC and finishing them in Reaper than I would the friction of, say, plugging my machine into my gaming laptop and finagling all of that. I would rather be able to just turn something on immediately and not have to connect it to a computer and just not have to think about it, but still have all the power of a computerized interface. Moving now to a hybrid of production and performance, let's talk about the Roland MC devices, the MC707 and the MC101. Now, the funny thing is, a year ago, the MC707 was actually kind of on the chopping block because I had it sitting around for a long time and wasn't really using it. And then I started getting really into making live jamming sets. And suddenly, the MC707 seemed perfect, and for a more chill, synthwave-centric set, it's been really nice. I've been a heavy user of the MC101, the MC707's little cousin, and I really view that as a production device rather than a performance device. It's got performance capabilities, but it's got a limited track count, and what I like it for is it allows me to be one of the 5 people who actually wants to take a device on the go and make stuff and then bring it into your DAW later. And the reason for this is twofold. I like the compactness of the MC101, but more importantly, I love the sound engine. I've made quite a bit of synthwave that I'm really happy with and that really represents the sound in my head on the MC101, and then recorded those tracks via USB into my computer and polished stuff, finished out those songs, and then released them, and they've done pretty well. That is already making the MC101 pretty indispensable for me. That's not going anywhere, guaranteed. And then once I got into live stuff, it really made sense to take advantage of the MC707's increased track count, increased hands-on controls, and the fact that it shares a project structure and sound engine with the MC101. So I was able to take a bunch of the synthwave stuff I had already made and then turn it into a live set. Now, the jamming on the MC707 is not quite as flexible as it is on the circuits, so the performance is a little more on rails than a circuit performance is, but I still think there's enough to do that I can do a nice, pleasant, continuous set that feels live enough for me and the audience I've played for to be cool with it. No disrespect intended to DJing, but performing on the MC707 is still doing quite a bit more on a moment-to-moment basis than DJing is. And of course, it was a live set that I was able to build completely from the ground up and on one device that I love the sound of. I've also paired that with my hologram microcosm because it can work as an insert effect on the MC707 because the MC707 has that capability. That's a sheer lucky coincidence, and while the microcosm does do a lot to fill out the sound and add shimmer and just texture to the synth sounds that I already like, it's not strictly necessary, but I would be very hard-pressed to get rid of that thing at this point because it's now part of one of my live sets. So at this point, I was thinking, well, because I deliberately own 2 devices with a ton of overlapping functionality, maybe it's time to turn in my minimalist card. But then I realized, if I truly had to get rid of everything else, I'd be fine with that. Even my hardware synths, because ultimately I'm not a synth guy, I'm a Groovebox guy and a workstation guy. And because I like the MC synth engine, and because the MC101 can do hands-on sound design, albeit slightly clunkily as of a firmware update, I don't really find myself reaching for my hardware synths for hands-on sound design that much. I would rather get sounds I like out of the Zencore synth engine on my MC devices. And if I absolutely had to get rid of everything else, I could totally make it work and be pretty happy, actually. But I feel like the list isn't complete without at least one standalone dedicated synthesizer. So if my collection got Thanos snapped, I would hope that my Microfreak or Minilog would survive. I should also mention that even though I definitely place the MPC-1 above the Akai Force in terms of irreplaceability, at least for the time being, I do want to hold on to the Force. It's not going anywhere for now. That's more duplicated functionality, but it's definitely more tailored for live stuff. I've been having some issues with it though, and that's why it doesn't make the list of indispensability, at least for now. For one thing, I actually did start to put together a live set on the Akai Force, and when I came back to it a few days later, a bunch of the audio that I had loaded in was no longer able to be found, even though the SD card I don't think had ever left the device. So that's concerning. That's a reliability thing that means I don't fully trust it for, being able to come to a gig the day of and go, oh crap, I don't have half my sound files. I can't play with this. That's bad. And maybe there's a workaround. Maybe I need to install an internal hard drive so I don't have to rely on the SD card as much. But that's a reliability thing that I need to figure out why that happened and make sure it can never happen again. And you want to talk about a live performance being on rails? I can't figure out a way to replicate the mute and unmute and swap everything out at once structure that the circuits give me. So despite the fact that it's way more annoying to load new sounds and to swap sounds out on the circuits, I would rather perform on the circuits over the Akai Force, at least so far. If any of you have frameworks or methods you like to use to perform on the Akai Force, please tell me in the comments below, and I would love to get feedback on how you would structure a live set, because I have a bunch of ideas, I just don't love any of them yet. Although, to be fair, I still do fully intend to make a live set on the Akai Force, because I could get something very flexible and polished out of it. Just performing it the way that I want to might be tough. So that's like the really complete list, but there are a couple other devices that I want to mention that you may be wondering about at this point. First of all, the Ableton Move is one of those weird things where it seems like it's designed for me, but because I'm not an Ableton user, I could kind of take it or leave it. There's a lot more I want to do with it, and in fact, I would like to use it as a way to get myself more familiarized with Ableton. I'll get there when I get there. So it's not going anywhere for now, but I wouldn't count on it being permanent. The Electribe 2 is another thing that is something I used to really like, and I got a lot of stuff I like out of it, but it just doesn't really fit with my sonic goals or my workflow goals these days, and so that I'm keeping it for now, but that's also one that's like potentially on the chopping block later. And finally, I want to mention the Machine, and I have both the big one, the Machine Mark III, and the Machine Micro, and I have not used those in ages, and that is no fault on them, other than the fact that I don't love the friction, as I alluded to earlier. I don't love the friction of having to deal with a USB device and a computer, especially a laptop that is by its nature portable. Having a setup be impermanent and requiring of finagling anytime you want to connect stuff is a real barrier to me making music, and so I'd rather just sidestep it with standalone devices if I can. I kind of thought when I got the Machine Mark III that it would be the perfect hybrid between hands-on physical control and all the power of a DAW, but because of that friction, that didn't really seem to come to pass. Although, to be fair, that's also because I was already pretty deep into the MPC-1 workflow at that point, and so it's what I know, and therefore what I'm more likely to reach for. I still recommend the Machine Micro to people as a great entry-level device because the price per functionality ratio is very good, and it is still one of the much more intuitive devices to dig into as a beginner. So I still absolutely recommend it, and if it was all I had, I could get a lot out of it. It's just personally not what I find myself reaching for these days. If you'd like to see some of this live stuff that I keep yapping about, you can check these videos out up over here somewhere, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching.